90% dependent on agricultural products for their exports. New Zealand's still about 75% dependent. Ireland has fallen to 10%. We do need to diversify the economy. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with agriculture, but you have a stronger economy if it has a more diversified base. We are still too heavily reliant on agriculture. That's not been negative towards agriculture. It's been negative towards the lack of development in the non-agricultural area. We really do have to develop the non-agricultural area. That doesn't mean that agriculture falls back in size. It means it continues to grow, but we need stronger growth in non-agriculture. We're not getting that. We're still very heavily reliant on agriculture. We're still an agricultural country. We are not a diversified country.
I'd just like to add one thought very briefly. I'm a huge fan of the primary sector and believe that in terms of scale, capability, science, international reach, that is a very, very important platform for our economic development. But it can't be in producing commodities. It has to be investing in the science, the management skills, international investment and investment at home in order to produce far higher value products off the land. And I don't mean, you know, branded yogurts. I mean the likes of lactopharmaceuticals and bioactives. And we could be an absolute leader in that if only the primary sector would understand there is a real limit to the upside of commodities and start to focus its efforts around a high science, high value future for the primary sector.
Right. So when Federated Farmers complains that public policy is tripping up the sector at the moment, that's not the case, or it doesn't really matter?
Of course it's important to keep those costs under control, but for example, for Federated Farmers to keep railing against NATE and not understanding that food security and traceability is one of the key drivers of markets is absolutely an example of how Federated Farmers doesn't have any idea what's going on in the world and what's driving the primary sector in the world. And again, last week, Federated Farmers was complaining that so little of the commodity price rise comes through to farmers. Yes, that's right, but Federated Farmers has no interest in trying to understand how farmers capture a bigger share of the value. And they would do so by investing in science, which they don't. They largely leave it to the government. By investing in Fonterra, which they don't, and they reject outside capital.
Thanks, Rod. Capturing a bigger share is what agriculture is all about, isn't it? Well, up next, we take a look at the headlines making the rounds. Welcome back. Now it's on to You Said It, comments in the ag media which we believe deserve further discussion. Well, Brian, Russell Norman, the Greens co-leader, he made a speech at their AGM recently saying no water, no milk, no environment, no economy. He's also suggesting a curb on Fonterra's 4% growth strategy. Is that a good or a bad idea?
Well, after this week's rain, it's hard to believe we've got a shortage of rain. But look, one of the things is that Fonterra just has to grow, and the management of water is very important, and it is very important that we do manage it very well. But we can't actually say, look, growth should be capped at 4%. We've got to find solutions to make sure that we have the appropriate water supply over the long term to be able to facilitate growth in excess of 4%. Look, we have a target of catching up with Australia. I don't believe we ever will. I'd be quite happy if the gap didn't get any wider between the two. But if we start capping the production of one of our major industry of 4% per annum, we never will catch Australia. In fact, we'll drop further behind. So we have to find good management systems for our water.
Do you agree, Rod?
If Fonterra had a strategy to increase the value of each litre of milk or each kilogram of milk solids faster than 4% a year, it would be an excellent idea to say, we're not taking any more volume, but we're going to push up the value. And that's essentially what Tartua has tried to do over the years. But in the absence of such a strategy from Fonterra, then volume will need to increase. And so what Norman is saying is you don't have much of an economy without farming, you don't have much of farming without good environment, you don't have much of an environment without very good water management. So that's the sequence, the logic of it. And so at one level, farmers and environmentalists should be able to agree on that. And it'd be very interesting to see come August, to see what sort of of consensus comes out of the Land and Water Forum on those issues when it reports back to the government, because all the indications are we're starting to get some sort of consensus around these issues from all those disparate parties, which up to now have just been sort of shouting at each other.
Well, still on matters environmental, the creation of the new Environmental Protection Agency, that's been welcomed in most quarters, but is the love affair going to last, Rod?
The basic concept is an important and good one, which is that the RMA is still, in many respects, a very good piece of legislation, but it's always fallen short because successive governments have failed to put in place any national policy statements to bring uniformity for those issues across the country. Now, Nick Smith, as Environment Minister, believes that the Environmental Protection Agency can do that, and that's why there's been widespread support. We need to see how that works out, particularly in terms of how much local input could then be made into decisions, rather than just having a blanket imposition of national standards. But farmers, I think, would be interested and need to note that this probably means that there will be some reduction in powers of regional councils. Now, farmers may think that's a good idea on environmental matters, but it means that they will be dealing not with their friends and neighbours who are councillors and staff members of councils, but a powerful national agency. And so I think that changes the dynamics and the relationship.
So there'll be a lot more rigour in the process they will need to go through?
Yes, there will be, and uniform national standards, which is a really important one. And the other part that Nick Smith is very keen on is environmental reporting. We are the only OECD country which doesn't have statutory reporting of environmental measures, which I find quite extraordinary given that we earn our living from our environment.
Well, another subject also related to the environment, Tom Henderson, a South Canterbury farmer, he received a Queen's Birthday honour for his far-sightedness, looking at an irrigation scheme in that area which resulted in the Opua Dam. But he wasn't seen as a visionary at the time. There was a lot of objection to that going ahead. Are we seeing a similar situation today, Rod, with new ideas for farming systems being put out there and then being shot down?
Absolutely. There's a very strong sort of consensus view prevails, and although New Zealand farmers are generally far quicker on adopting new technology compared with some other countries, very much more sensitive to market signals, for example, there are some real leaders in all branches of agriculture out there who get widely dismissed in the early stages, but that's true across almost any sector. I think it's probably rather a human condition, so I wouldn't pick up on farmers for that in particular.
No. But we need more thinking outside the square, Brian.
We do, and I've been surprised, say, in relation to South Canterbury Finance. There was a very good article in the Listener a few weeks ago about Alan Hubbard, and I got a lot of emails saying from farmers or people in that area criticising him because he had funded some of these irrigation schemes and some of these innovative schemes, and it was quite an eye-opener to me, the amount of antagonism towards Mr. Hubbard because he had funded some of these innovation schemes. They seemed to judge him as a person very good, but they criticised him quite strongly for where he had lent some of his money. It was an eye-opener to me, the kind of opposition there is to some of this innovation.
Right, OK. Well, criticism very much on Alan Crafer's mind in a film clip on the Country 99 TV website where he maintains that receivers are trying to break him psychologically. What's your view, Brian?
The receivership law is very simple. You own an asset, whether it be a company or a farm, and you decide to borrow some money. And you've got obligations to meet the interest payments on that or to repay the loans. Once you breach that, effectively the control of that asset goes to the receiver because the receiver comes in acting on behalf of the person who lended you the money, normally a bank. So when Alan Crafer or anybody else puts themselves in that position because they're unable to meet their obligations to the persons and the individuals they borrowed money from, they put themselves in that situation. It's an unfortunate circumstances of receivership, but I'm afraid it happens all the time. And Alan Crafer is just receiving it. He obviously borrowed too much money. He couldn't service the cost of that, and therefore the individuals who lend him the money, and he agreed to meet certain conditions, are now exercising their rights. It happens all the time in New Zealand, and he is in that same position as everyone else is.
Do you agree with Brian, Rod?
I do. At a human and personal level, not to have ever met Mr. Crafer, I feel great sympathy for him, but the reality is these are investments he should have known more about as he entered into them and bear the responsibility for them. So I'd have to say the problem is not with the insolvency laws and the receivership laws, but at rather more at a personal level, Mr. Crayford trying to deal with these issues. And I say I'm sympathetic at a personal level, but I certainly don't believe